Okay, skipping over developmental, which I like to do primarily if the stories and what was done in developmental has little to no bearing on the primary story of the character. And we see this in many legendary acts. For example, The Undertaker, when he was Mark Calloway, doesn't have too much of an impact on the dead man's career, story ultimately. Or Leo Kruger doesn't impact or have any connection with Adam Rose. However, there are some characters where developmental does impact the story. And we see this primarily in the 2010s with the popularity of NXT and everything being more televised and broadcasted, and the audience having more knowledge of the growth and history of performers. That being said, Orton's developmental career will be skipped in this discourse, as to me it has little to no impact on him as a character or his development. Now, we first see Orton on SmackDown. He's a blue chipper, hungry kid, following in his father's footsteps, looking to make a name for himself. A young and naive kid who gets lured into a toxic, or what modern society will refer to as a simpish, interaction with Stacy Keibler, who's the assistant and mistress of the boss, Vince McMahon. Orton, naive, a rookie with a thirst to prove himself and earn his keep with one of the hottest women at the time who had an eye for him. He was caught in a paradox. Here was one of the most sought after women on the planet at the time, desiring him. And here was his boss who'd invested in him, who he didn't want to betray. Young and inexperienced, he tried to walk the line between competing seriously, but also found himself seduced by Stacy. Vince, seeing this, became furious, and this would lead to a series of matches and interactions where Orton was disciplined or put back in his place, which we see a lot during his beginning/origin story, primarily with Vince, but later on down the line with his mentor. Now, this is done primarily by one of Vince's favorite guys, Hardcore Holly. Both on screen and off screen looked upon as, the hired gun goon of Vince. But Orton went through this phase of simping and learned the other side of the coin regarding women, and also just how dark the business could be. He was taught through the interactions with Stacey early on that they could be deceitful, conniving, while simultaneously beautiful, and also make a man 3 times larger than he actually was in reality, which we later see transpired during his growth. Now, after injuring his shoulder and being sidelined, Orton was forced to sit at home to recover from injury. Written off and forgotten, abandoned and seen as a failure to his father's legacy and potential, Orton had to look to the only fan he had left, which was himself. And so while rehabbing, speaking to himself and talking himself up, he began to develop into a narcissist gradually. And betting on himself, he created RNN, the Randy News Network, to keep the audience updated on his condition and to also ensure that he would not be forgotten in a mere memory to the audience. Now, while the audience slowly lost interest in Orton, a great leader was watching and took interest. Now, Triple H in his physical prime knew the best way to secure a throne was with a great court and team around him versus flying solo and being a target to everyone and anyone. He'd learned this during his own tutelage from Shawn Michaels with DX and also with the corporation and the corporate ministry. Now, Orton, while learning under the guidance and tutelage of Triple H and Ric Flair, he felt the heat of the pressure from critics and even peers behind the scenes, and often dealing with the nepotism claims and that he was only put in Evolution because of his father being a legend. This created and hardened an animosity within him to prove that he was above and beyond the legends he was compared to, which boiled over into him attacking legendary icons and dubbing himself the Legend Killer, a means to spit on the claims of nepotism. He entered the business as a humble blue chipper, had been tired and tried to quietly climb the ranks, but no matter how humble and nice he was never good enough. It was through the guidance of Triple H that he learned quickly. You rarely see bullies go after the kid who's as mean or as nasty as they are. They usually target the nice kid or the nice guy. And if Orton wanted to be left alone, he'd have to embrace the nastiness beneath the surface. That guidance, coupled with his anger towards the nepotism claims, birthed the Legend Killer. It was also during this time Orton learned how chess was played within the business and the importance of protecting the king on the board so that the ultimate battle could be won. When he joined Triple H inside the Elimination Chamber, it took the fall to ensure the king and the reign of Evolution continued. As a loyal knight and soldier within, he had proven himself worthy, and as a result, we saw the influence of the king. Triple H wielded over Eric Bischoff to win Orton opportunities to challenge for gold a lot faster than most of his peers. Orton saw the favor being repaid as honor and the love of a big brother. And finally, after spending all the years alone and having only himself to look at to believe in, he found his family within the business, within Evolution. He was under the spell of Triple H and would fall on the sword for the leader and the group at this time if it meant for the greater good of everyone. This later led to a feud between himself and Shawn Michaels, one of his mentor's greatest rivals. To prove himself and his loyalty to his mentor, as well as show gratitude, Orton took initiative to take down the Heartbreak Kid. Shawn Michaels, having his patented sweet chin music, which could be fired at any time during a match, forced Orton to develop a maneuver that could do the same. It was during this time that the RKO was used, and after finding a weapon that could put down opponents at any given moment, it led to Orton becoming Intercontinental Champion, holding it for over 200 days, the longest reign within 7 years. This only swelled his head and ego. It was during this time that one of Triple H's greatest nemesis also returned in Mick Foley. Once again, to put out the potential threat before it blossomed, Orton took initiative to put down the hardcore icon. However, Orton, fueled by confidence of his long reign and not seeing Foley as a real threat because of his age and broken body, made it a mission to not only defeat Foley but to embarrass and destroy him and eradicate him once and for all. Orton miscalculated and was put through hell before finally vanquishing Foley once and for all. The experience, however, was necessary because Foley did what he always did to his greatest adversaries. The experience of conquering Foley gave Orton the dog mentality, which is something that many performers lack. Kill mode, as I like to call it. And knowing when to go into kill mode to truly put an opponent down once and for all was what Orton learned from this experience, which poetically is also the same opponent that taught his mentor Triple H the same thing. This most notably was during the street fight at the Royal Rumble for Triple H. After the wars with Foley, Orton finally lost the Intercontinental title to Edge, which we'll come back to later. Now, humbled by this loss, Orton sought direction, and he received it. His mentor, Triple H, had been dethroned of the World Heavyweight title by Chris Benoit, and recovering from an injury, Triple H had given Orton the order to once again be a good soldier at SummerSlam, to just beat down and soften Benoit, but to not take the gold. The status quo of Evolution was always built for Triple H to be at the top. Orton and Batista would be secondary, while Rick mentored in the shadows and occasionally stepped in. This was how the unit was constructed. Orton, however, in the midst of fighting Benoit, was pushed into kill mode by the Crippler, a mode he had just learned from his experiences of battling Mick Foley, a mode he didn't quite yet know how to turn on and turn off at given times. Being young and unable to exit that mode, he took the title and was shocked and surprised by his own ability to be able to do something that his big brother and mentor could not do, which was defeat Chris Benoit. It was also during this time Orton became the youngest world champion in history at the age of 24. This, as we all likely know, was management's attempt to smite Brock Lesnar, who had departed the company on bad terms. After the match, Benoit was classing his loss. He shook Orton's hand and yelled to him, "Be a man, be the man," which, in an odd way, was Benoit passing the torch to tell Orton it was time to be the lion at the top of the food chain. It was time to be the man. Orton, however, was conflicted. He was astounded by his growth in ability, but still loyal to Evolution and the family unit he'd been a part of. However, he knew he'd screwed up and gone too far. In his heart, he looked at Triple H as his big brother and had hoped he'd done the group proud. You see, Orton saw himself holding the gold as it's a part of Evolution, as this is what Triple H had always taught him. It's for the group. It's for Evolution. Me being the champ is for the group. Orton said, well, me holding the gold, it's for the group too, right? As long as the group has the gold, everyone gets to eat, from his mentality. So that night, there'd been no communication, no congratulations, just radio silence as he went to the hotel and slept through the night with the gold. The next day, August 16, 2004, that all changed. Triple H viewed Orton disobeying his orders and taking the gold as the ultimate betrayal. His protege, who was like a little brother to him, had taken the thing that mattered the most to him in the world. Now, to truly understand this dynamic might be difficult for younger and newer fans that didn't follow the product at the time. But world titles meant everything back then. They were power and control and everything for whatever character held them, not just props like they've become for some champions over the years. Taking a world title from a champion in that era was almost like taking a man's wife or house from him. Orton, from his perspective, thought his family and Evolution would be proud of him, and his big brother, more so than anyone, would be proud of how far he'd grown and excelled thanks to his leadership. That night, after Orton defeated Benoit in a rematch, Evolution came down to congratulate him, and during the celebration, laid one of the most vicious beatdowns on him as a consequence. Now, this betrayal, Orton didn't even have time to process or soak in it. He was still the world champion and a marked man, and he knew he only had two ways to deal with it. He could either bend the knee or do what Triple H and Ric Flair taught him to do to the bullies, to become just as mean and nasty as the bully. Now, Triple H invited Orton back in the fold under the condition that he hand over the world title, but Orton, the monster that Triple H had created, spit in the face of his mentor and attacked him, becoming just as nasty and just as mean as the bully. Now, over time, Triple H, with the help of Evolution, defeated Orton to reclaim the title. But Orton had now tasted gold and wanted to taste it again, developing a lust for gold similar to his former mentor. He also, however, wanted vengeance upon the family that had wronged him. So, using the guerrilla hit-and-run sneak tactics that he'd been taught under the Cerebral Assassin, Orton challenged the Evolution members one by one before finally being put down by his mentor, Triple H. It was a lesson. Although Triple H had taught everything that Orton knew, he didn't teach Orton everything that the game knew. It was a bittersweet vengeance. Although he put down Batista and Flair, he still had yet to truly put down and surpass the man who had built him and top it. After this, Orton still wanted gold and vengeance, but had to question his abilities to a certain point. It was during this time, Stacy Keibler, the seductress who had once lured the young lion into mischief, took actual real interest in him. She was no longer McMahon's mistress and smitten by the young stud. Orton, however, craved vengeance and never forgot about how she misled him. However, he'd also learned from his mentor, Triple H, the ability to use others for his own gain. From Triple H using Stephanie to become the man, to Orton using Stacy to repair his bruised ego and return as 3 times the man he once was. Now, during that relationship, superstar Billy Graham, a legend, appeared and advised a broken Orton to go where no man had gone before. Where the latest issue of SmackDown magazine, I think it was March 2005 at the time, featured Taker, who remained undefeated and was also a legend, not even Flair at Mania 18 or Triple H at Mania 17 had ever been able to defeat at Mania. This was a mountain for Orton to scale and a way of surpassing Triple H, and another legend for him to top him. Now, with a new goal to immortalize him and elevate him above his big brother, Orton declared his challenge to the Dead Man. The Dead Man, however, found a young upstart amusing and not serious, and saw it best to taunt the young stallion, which prompted many to question if Orton was scared of The Undertaker. So Orton needed to make a statement, and he had the perfect accessory to do such a thing. Just as Stacy had once used him for her amusement and gain, he'd do the same. The fuel of the legend killer, motivation to surpass Triple H, anger towards Stacy's mistreatment of him early in his career, and the mean streak that Foley had planted within him all collided when he RKO'd Stacy and declared he was not scared of The Undertaker. Now alone, Orton turned to the only person he had left, his own blood. His father, Cowboy Bob Orton, forgot until how to help put down a dead man. Orton would ultimately lose at Mania, but even that didn't douse his rage and need to conquer what Triple H had never conquered. He went farther and farther and farther and deeper into levels of madness to try to destroy the dead man, but it was to no avail. And in the end, Orton will fall to the Taker at Hell in a Cell at Armageddon, similar to his mentor, never able to conquer the unconquerable Undertaker. And I think with Orton, at the beginning, we see him as a young, naive young man who came in humble, but through the process of entering a ruthless, cutthroat world, was used and nearly thrown away. A casualty, similar to what we see with many others. We all remember Mason Ryan, this guy with great potential and no one really thinks about it again. You know, people showing up with great potential and just disappearing happens all the time in that business. But because he had potential, he was later adopted and pulled into the only sense of family he had in the business of evolution, where he found actual success and learned how to survive within that world. But ultimately, he was merely used again as a pawn. Now, when he was forced out and left on his own by the people who, taught him and built him, he had to find a way to adapt. And with these newfound abilities and knowledge, the first thing he decided to do was put a stake in the heart of the first person who had betrayed him, which was Stacy Keibler. Now, this, to me, demonstrates how vindictive and rancorous Orton is as a character. The early years were what planted the seeds for what he develops into later, both as a leader of legacy as well as when he becomes the Viper. And post-evolution, we see him in an odd way emulating the career of his mentor while also trying to surpass him. Whereas we saw DX reform, two former enemies in Trips and Sean, we see Orton do the same with a former enemy in Edge, to try to kind of one-up Trips. And we also see this play out with him trying to always climb mountains that Triple H couldn't climb. Although he's climbed one in Chris Benoit, his desire to prove he is superior to his mentor in every way, not an equal, but superior. And that when Triple H cast him out and took everything away from him, it was Triple H who was wrong. And it was done out of fear and jealousy rather than for the fact that Orton had disobeyed him. Because Orton was still about evolution. He saw it as, well, the gold is still with evolution. So no problem, right? As long as the gold is with the group, it shouldn't be a problem. But Triple H didn't want the gold for evolution. He wanted it for himself and himself alone. So Orton, realizing this later on, follows a similar model. However, keeping it strictly within his art, we see the opponent's Orton faces from Foley to Taker slowly awaken that sadistic monster and bring out that kill mode in him that pushes him to this level, which we see later in his career. Which is why I think for many fans of Orton, this was one of the most enjoyable arcs and phases of his career, because we see constant growth of him throughout it as a character. And he's never stagnant at all, maybe in the beginning, but once he starts growing, he just doesn't stop growing during this arc. And he's never really stagnant. There's always something going on with him. So what are your thoughts on the origin of Orton? Legend Killer, evolution, and even the Taker arc and development of his character and psyche throughout it.